The New Orleans night was a fever dream, the French Quarter pulsing with the wail of a saxophone and the sharp tang of Creole spices carried on the wind. Rain fell in sheets, relentless, turning the cobblestone alleys into slick mirrors that caught the neon glow of Bourbon Street, pink-purple electric blue, flickering like a heartbeat. Amara Thompson. 30 pushed through the back door of Crescent Pages, a cramped bookstore wedged between a voodoo shop and a dive bar where the jazz never stopped. Her yellow raincoat faded at the seams, clung to her frame, water dripping from her tight curls, pulled high in a bun that was unraveling under the storm's weight. She dragged a trash bag, its plastic scraping the wet pavement, her boots splashing through puddles that smelled of earth bourbon and something faintly sweet, like magnolias, bruised by the rain. Amara's breath puffed out in small clouds, her skin deep, warm brown, like polished mahogany, glistening under the downpour. Crescent Pages was her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in the musty scent of old books and the wide-eyed wonder of kids from the lower Ninth Ward who flocked to her Saturday story hours. 3 years ago, she'd fled Atlanta, running from ghosts that still haunted her, her parents and little brother taken in a car crash when she was 22. Her fiancé Marcus, who'd gutted her with a betrayal she couldn't name without wincing. New Orleans, with its jazz and chaos, had stitched some of her wounds, but tonight the air was thick, charged, like the city was holding its breath for something big. A sound sliced through the rain, a low, broken sob, raw and jagged, coming from the alley behind St. Louis Cathedral. The narrow strip of shadow, slick with moss and littered with broken bottles, swallowed the streetlight's feeble glow. Amara froze her heart, kicking up the trash bag, slipping from her hand to the pavement. The saxophone's wail from the bar faded, leaving only the steady patter of rain and that gut punch of a cry like someone was shattering and didn't know how to stop. She wiped her hands on her damp jeans, the denim cold against her palms, and moved toward the sound, her boots squelching her pulse, hammering in her ears. Part of her screamed to turn back. New Orleans alleys weren't kind to strangers, but another part, the part that had survived loss and betrayal, knew pain when she heard it. In the alley, a flickering street lamp cast a weak halo over a man slumped against a dumpster, his head bowed, shoulders heaving. His black suit, tailored to perfection, was soaked through, streaked with mud, his polished shoes ruined by the puddles pooling around him. A gold wedding ring glinted on the pavement, abandoned like a confession, its surface etched with a faint logo, a stylized R she recognized from tech headlines. His sobs were quieter now, muffled as if he'd spent himself and was trying to hide what was left. Amara's breath caught. She didn't know who he was, but she knew that kind of hurt, the kind that stripped you bare and left you with nothing but the weight of your own broken pieces. 7 years ago, she'd stood by her family's graves in Atlanta, the Georgia clay red under her feet, her tears mixing with the rain. 3 years ago, she'd walked into her apartment to find Marcus tangled with her best friend, his lies unraveling everything she'd built. This man, whoever he was drowning in that same kind of pain, and she couldn't walk away. She stepped forward, her knees sinking into the cold, wet pavement as she knelt beside him. The rain plastered her curls to her cheeks, her raincoat useless now, but she barely noticed. Her hand hovered over his shoulder, hesitant, then settled, gentle but firm, the way she calmed kids lost in the bookstore's aisles. He flinched, his head jerking up and their eyes locked. His were a piercing blue, red-rimmed and blurred with tears, set in a face carved with sharp angles and quiet devastation. For a heartbeat, he looked at her like she was a ghost, his breath hitching a ragged sound that vibrated against the rain's steady drum. "Hey," she whispered, her voice low, steady, cutting through the storm. "You don't have to say nothing. I'm just here." He didn't reply, his gaze dropping shame flickering across his face. But Amara didn't budge. She slid her arms around him, pulling him into a hug, not too tight, just enough to anchor him. The heat of his body seeped through his soaked suit, a stark contrast to the chill of the rain. His breath caught again, sharp and uneven, and for a moment, he stiffened, like he didn't know how to be held. Then he sank into her, his hands gripping the back of her raincoat, fingers digging in like she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. The scent of him hit her sandalwood cologne, damp wool, and something sharper like grief itself mingling with the alley's wet earth and faint magnolia sweetness. Her heart pounded not just from the cold, but from the weight of his pain, the way his chest rose and fell against hers, urgent, alive. The rain kept falling, a curtain that shut out the world, leaving only the two of them in this dark, broken place. Her knees ached, her jeans soaked through, but she held on her breath, warm against his ear. His sobs slowed, blending with the storm, until they were just a tremor under her hands. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Minutes, maybe hours. But it felt like a lifetime, a moment carved out of the city's chaos where nothing else mattered. Finally, when his breathing steadied, she eased back her hands, lingering on his shoulders. He kept his head down, wiping his face with a wet sleeve, still avoiding her eyes. Amara's gaze caught the wedding ring on the pavement, its gold glinting under the street lamp, the etched R, a clue she couldn't ignore. She'd seen it before in articles about Reed Tech, a Baltimore-based empire run by a man named Alexander Reed. Her stomach twisted. Was this him, a billionaire broken in an alley? She reached for the ring, her cold fingers brushing the smooth metal, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Her touch deliberate, a silent question. Their eyes met again, and something electric sparked between them, a raw, unspoken pull that made her breath catch. His hand twitched like he wanted to reach for her, but she stood brushing the rain from her face, her heart racing. "You gonna be okay?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost lost in the rain. He nodded, his voice hoarse, barely audible. "Who are you?" She smiled, faint but real, her curls dripping water down her neck. "Just someone who gets it." Amara turned her boots, splashing as she walked back to Crescent Pages. The rain, a steady drumbeat against her raincoat. She glanced back once, seeing him still there, a shadow under the street lamp, his hand in his pocket where the ring now rested. Her pulse hadn't slowed, and she wasn't sure it would. New Orleans had a way of weaving stories out of rain and jazz, and this one felt like it was just beginning. Inside the bookstore, the warmth hit her like a hug, the smell of old paper and chicory coffee wrapping around her. She peeled off her raincoat, revealing a black sweater that hugged her curves, and hung it on a wooden hook by the door. Water dripped from her curls, trailing down her neck, and she let out a shaky breath. What had she just done? Hugging a stranger in an alley wasn't her style. Not anymore. After Marcus, she'd locked her heart tight, keeping people at arm's length. But something about that man, about his pain, had cracked her open, and she didn't know what to do with it. She moved to the counter, her fingers brushing a worn copy of The Color Purple, a book she'd read a dozen times, its words a lifeline through her darkest days. The saxophone from the bar next door wove through the air, a slow, mournful tune that matched the ache in her chest. She didn't know who he was, not for sure, but the ring that logo nagged at her. If he was Alexander Reed, what was a man like that doing in a place like this? Alexander Reed sat in his suite at the Hotel Monteleone, the French Quarter's neon chaos glowing through the window. His suit was still damp, clinging to his skin, a reminder of the alley where he'd fallen apart. The wedding ring sat on the nightstand, its etched R catching the light of a flickering lamp. 2 days ago, his fiancée, Sophia Laurent, had left him at the altar in a Miami penthouse, vanishing hours before the vows, with a note. "I can't do this." The media had eaten it up. Tech king, jilted bride, Bolts and Alexander. A man who thrived on control had driven to New Orleans to escape the noise only to unravel in a rain-soaked alley. He didn't know why he'd let her hold him. He wasn't the type to break, not in front of anyone, let alone a stranger, but her hug, warm, steady, unflinching, had been a lifeline. Her voice a tether when he thought he'd drown. Her touch, the way her fingers had slipped the ring into his pocket, had sparked something he couldn't name. He could still see her face, those deep brown eyes, the curve of her lips, the strength in her posture despite the rain. She wasn't just a good Samaritan. She was a force, and he needed to know who she was. He stood running a hand through his dark hair still wet from the storm. Baltimore had taught him to keep his guard up. His father's fists, his mother's absence, the streets that didn't forgive weakness. Reed Tech was his armor, a fortress built on logic and ambition. But tonight that armor had cracked, and a woman with no name had slipped through. Crescent Pages, the bookstore's sign, had read, "Tomorrow he'd go back." He didn't know what he was chasing, but for the first time in years he felt alive, back at Crescent Pages. Amara was stacking books when Jade Carter burst in, her purple-streaked hair, damp her nose ring glinting under the lights. Jade, 26, was a Vietnamese-American artist with a mouth that didn't quit her band tease and sharp wit, a perfect foil to Amara's quiet strength. "Girl, what you doing out in that storm?" Jade said, tossing her bag on the counter. "You look like you just wrestled a gator." Amara laughed, shaking her head. "Just taking out the trash. Got caught in the rain." Jade narrowed her eyes, leaning closer. "Uh-huh. Spill the tea, Mara. You got that look like you just did something wild." "Wild's your vibe, not mine," Amara said, but her smile faltered. She could still feel his hands the way they'd gripped her raincoat, the heat of his breath against her ear. She shook it off, turning to the books. "Just another night in NOLA, you know." Jade smirked, undeterred. "Keep playing cool, but I'm watching you. This city's gonna pull you into some kind of trouble." Amara didn't reply. Her gaze drifting to the window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the neon signs glowing like a siren's call. She didn't know if she'd see him again, but the ring in her mind, the etched R, felt like a question she couldn't ignore. Trouble, Jade had said. Maybe she was right. The bell above the door jingled and Amara's heart skipped. A man stepped in his coat, dark with rain, his face shadowed. For a second she thought it was him, but it was just a tourist asking for a guidebook. She exhaled, her pulse still racing, and turned back to the color purple. New Orleans was a city of ghosts and magic, and tonight it had woven a story she wasn't sure she was ready to read. Hey Soul Stories fam, that alley hug was straight up fire, right? Drop a comment and tell us what's a moment of kindness that changed your life. Hit that subscribe button to see where Amara and Alexander's story takes us next. The French Quarter woke with a hangover. Its cobblestone streets slick from last night's rain, littered with plastic beads, and the faint echo of jazz that never quite stopped. Inside Crescent Pages, the air was thick with the scent of chicory coffee and old books, a comfort that wrapped around Amara Thompson like a worn quilt. She stood behind the counter, her fingers sorting a stack of donated children's books for the lower Ninth Ward. But her mind was stuck in a rain-soaked alley behind St. Louis Cathedral. That hug, the weight of a stranger's pain, the glint of a wedding ring etched with an R. It clung to her like the humidity, heavy and impossible to shake. 4 days had passed since that night, and the man Alexander Reed, if the ring and her Google search were right, had become a fixture at the bookstore. He showed up every afternoon, browsing the shelves with a quiet intensity, picking out books like The Color Purple or Native Son, and lingering longer than necessary. His blue eyes caught hers too often, his low voice carrying a warmth that made her pulse jump. Amara wasn't naive. He wasn't here for the literature, but letting him in even a little felt like stepping onto a tightrope with no net below. "Yo, Mara, you daydreaming again?" Jade Carter's voice snapped her back sharp and teasing. Her coworker leaned against the counter, her purple-streaked hair pulled into a messy bun, her band tee proclaiming some indie band Amara had never heard of. Jade's nose ring glinted under the bookstore's soft lights, her grin all mischief. Amara rolled her eyes, stacking a copy of The Very Hungry Caterpillar with a little too much force. "I'm working, Jade. Unlike some people, uh-huh," Jade said, smirking. "Working on what? Staring into space. Thinking about Mr. Fancy Coat Dude's been in here every day looking at you like you're the last beignet in New Orleans." Amara's cheeks warmed, but she played it cool. "You're seeing things. He's just a customer. A customer who buys a book a day and stares like he's trying to memorize your whole damn face." Jade raised an eyebrow, leaning closer. "Spill the tea, girl. What's the deal with you and Tech Boy?" "There's no tea," Amara said, but her voice betrayed her a little too quick. Her mind flashed to Alexander's hands, the way they'd gripped her raincoat in the alley. The heat of his breath against her ear. He was fine. No question. Sharp, cheekbones, broad shoulders, a body that filled out a coat, like he lived at the gym. But fine wasn't safe. Marcus had been fine too, until he'd ripped her heart out. She wasn't about to let another man do the same, billionaire or not. Jade wasn't buying it. Keep telling yourself that, but you're feeling something. Just don't let it mess you up. Okay, you've been through enough. Amara's smile faded. Jade was right. After Marcus, she'd built walls high enough to keep anyone out. But Alexander's presence, his quiet questions about books, the way he listened when she talked about Atlanta, it was chipping away at those walls, and she hated how much she liked it. The bell above the door jingled, and Amara's heart did a traitor's flip. Alexander stepped inside, his dark coat dusted with the morning's mist. His hair slightly tousled like he'd been caught in a breeze. He carried himself with a confidence that filled the room, but his eyes softened when they found her a crack in his armor that made her breath catch. "Hey," he said, his voice sliding over her like the jazz spilling in from the bar next door, low and smooth. "Got anything new on the shelves?" Amara leaned against the counter, crossing her arms to hide her nerves. "Depends. You actually reading those books you're buying, or you're just trying to look cute?" His lips twitched, a rare smile breaking through, and damn if it didn't do things to her. Maybe a little of both. The color purple hit hard, though. "You were right about Sally's strength." She raised an eyebrow, surprised he'd actually read it. "Okay, Tech Boy. I see you. If you liked that, you might vibe with their eyes were watching God. It's about finding your voice when the world tries to shut you up." He nodded, stepping closer, his coat brushing the counter. "Sounds like you know a thing or two about that." Her throat tightened, his words cutting deeper than she expected. She turned to the shelves, needing a distraction, and pulled the book down, her fingers lingering on the worn cover. "Yeah, maybe," she said, handing it to him. Their fingers brushed, and a spark shot through her, warm and electric. His eyes darkened just for a second, and she knew he'd felt it too. "Amara," Jade's voice rang out from the back, dripping with fake exasperation. "You gonna help me with these boxes, or just flirt with your VIP?" Amara's face burned, and she stepped back, laughing to cover it. "Keep talking, Jade, and you're unpacking those solo." Alexander chuckled, a low, warm sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "I'll let you get back to it," he said, tucking the book under his arm. "But I'm holding you to that recommendation." As he left the bell jingling behind him, Amara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Jade appeared grinning like she'd just won a bet. "Oh, you're in deep," she said, nudging her. "That man's got you shook." "Shut up," Amara muttered, but she couldn't stop the smile creeping onto her face. That night, Crescent Pages was hosting a book drive for kids in the lower 9th Ward, the store buzzing with volunteers and locals dropping off donations. Amara and Jade stayed late sorting books under the glow of string lights strung across the ceiling. The jazz bar next door was in full swing. a saxophone riff curling through the open windows, mingling with the hum of conversation and the faint smell of powdered sugar from a nearby beignet stand. Alexander showed up just as the crowd thinned, a stack of children's books under his arm. Charlotte's Web, Esperanza, Rising, The Lion, The Witch, and The Wardrobe. "Heard you were collectin'," he said, setting them on the counter, his voice casual, but his eyes intent. "Thought I'd pitch in." Amara's eyebrows shot up her hands, pausing over a box. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged, leaning against the counter close enough that she caught the scent of him, sandalwood leather and a hint of rain still clinging to his coat. Wanted to Jade, stacking boxes in the corner, shot Amara a look that screamed, "I told you so." Amara ignored her, flipping through his donations. "Solid picks," she said, impressed. "You got a secret soft spot for kids' stories, or you just showing off?" "Maybe I just wanted an excuse to see you," he said, his voice low, a challenge in his eyes that made her pulse race. Her breath hitched, but she smirked, keeping it light. "Smooth talker, huh? You'll need more than that to keep up in NOLA." His laugh was a growl, deep and rough, and it sent heat curling through her. Challenge accepted. The store emptied out, leaving just Amara, Alexander, and the pulse of jazz. Jade, sensing the vibe, grabbed her bag with a dramatic flourish. "I'm out," she said, winking at Amara. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do, which, let's be real, ain't much." Amara rolled her eyes, laughing. "Get out of here, Jade." The door swung shut, and the bookstore felt smaller, the air thicker, charged with something neither of them could ignore. They started shelving the donated books, their movements slow, deliberate, like they were both stalling. The neon lights from the French Quarter bled through the windows, painting Amara's skin in shades of purple and blue, her black sweater catching the glow like a second skin. "You ever feel like you're carrying something you can't put down?" Alexander asked, his voice quiet as he slid a book onto a shelf. "Like no matter how far you run, it's still there." Amara paused. Esperanza, rising in her hand, her heart twisting. "Every day," she said, her voice softer now. "Lost my family when I was 22. Car crash. Then my fiancé. Let's just say he wasn't who I thought I came to New Orleans to start over. But some days, it feels like I'm still dragging all that pain." He turned to her, his eyes searching blue and unguarded. "I get that. My fiancé left me 2 days before our wedding. No warning, just gone. I thought I had it all locked down, business life, everything. But now I'm just lost." Her chest tightened. She knew that Lost had lived it. Without thinking, she stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, the wool of his coat rough under her fingers. "You're not lost," she said, her voice steady. "You're right here." His eyes darkened, and before she could pull back, he closed the gap, his hand cupping her face. His thumb grazed her cheek, warm against her skin, and the world shrank to the space between them. The saxophone outside hit a high note, sharp and sweet, as he leaned in, his breath hot against her lips. Their kiss was slow at first, tentative like they were testing the waters. Then it deepened, his hand sliding to her waist, pulling her flush against him. Her fingers curled into his coat, the fabric damp from the night air, and she felt the heat of him through her sweater, his heartbeat pounding against hers. The neon lights flickered, casting a purple glow across her skin, highlighting the curve of her neck, the softness of her lips. The jazz wove around them, a sultry melody that matched the rhythm of their breaths. His hand slipped under her sweater, brushing the bare skin of her lower back, and she gasped into his mouth, the sound igniting something in him. His grip tightened, his kisses growing hungrier, and she pressed herself closer, the shelves digging into her back as they stumbled against them. The bell above the door jingled, and they broke apart, breathless, as Jade's voice cut through the haze. "You all for real right now?" she said, hands on her hips, grinning like a cat with cream. "I leave for 10 minutes, and you're turning this place into a damn romance novel." Amara's face burned and she stepped back, smoothing her sweater, her lips tingling. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a sheepish smile tugging at his lips. "Bad timing," he muttered. "Perfect timing," Jade said, laughing. "But I'm locking up, so y'all gotta take this vibe somewhere else." Amara shot her a look, but her heart was still racing, her body humming with the memory of his touch. Alexander grabbed his books, his eyes lingering on her. "Tomorrow?" he asked, and it was a promise, not a question. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely steady. "Tomorrow." The next evening, Crescent Pages was packed for a pop-up book fair in the French Quarter, a street event with local authors, live jazz, and the smell of gumbo drifting from food stalls. Amara helped set up a booth outside the store, her black dress hugging her curves, her curls bouncing as she moved. Alexander was there carrying boxes, like he'd been part of the crew forever, his sleeves rolled up, his smile easy. Every time their eyes met, a spark flared and she had to remind herself to breathe. The fair was alive, the street pulsing with music and laughter. When a woman stepped out of the crowd, her presence like a storm rolling in. She was tall, with glossy blonde hair and a red dress that screamed money, her heels clicking on the cobblestones, her green eyes locked onto Alexander, and Amara froze a stack of books in her hands. "Alex," the woman said, her voice smooth but sharp, cutting through the jazz. She touched his arm, her fingers lingering, possessive. "We need to talk." Alexander's face hardened, his jaw tight. "Sophia," he said, his voice cold. "What the hell are you doing here?" Amara's stomach dropped. Sophia, the fiancée who'd left him, the one who'd broken him. She watched as Sophia leaned closer, her hand still on his arm, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I made a mistake, Alex. I want us back. I want to fix this." The words hit Amara like a slap, dragging her back to Atlanta, to Marcus's lies, to the moment she'd found him with her best friend. Her hands trembled, the book slipping, and she turned away, her heart pounding. Alexander called her name, but she didn't stop pushing through the crowd, the jazz drowning out the sound of her breaking heart. Amara ended up at her apartment, a small studio above a po' boy shop in the Marigny, the saxophone from a nearby bar filtering through her window. She sat on her couch, staring at a copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God on her coffee table, its pages worn from years of reading. Her lips still burned from Alexander's kiss, but her heart was heavy with doubt. Was he playing her? Was she just a rebound, a way to forget Sophia? She'd let her walls down, and now she was paying for it. Her phone buzzed, Jade no doubt ready to drag the whole story out of her. But Amara ignored it, her eyes drifting to the window, where the neon lights of New Orleans glowed like a warning. She'd come to this city to escape her past, but maybe some wounds were too deep to outrun, and maybe Alexander Reed was just another scar waiting to happen. The Amtrak rattled through the Midwest Chicago skyline, rising like a jagged promise against a gray dawn. Amara Thompson leaned her head against the train's window, the glass cool against her cheek, her curls spilling over her shoulder. She clutched a worn copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God, her fingers tracing the pages, but her mind was back in New Orleans, replaying a kiss that had set her on fire, and a betrayal that had doused it cold. Sophia Laurent's red dress, her hand on Alexander Reed's arm, her whispered, "I want us back." It was all Amara could see, a loop of pain that dragged her back to Atlanta, to Marcus's lies, to the moment her world had crumbled. A week had passed since she'd fled the French Quarter book fair, the jazz chasing her like a ghost. She hadn't returned to Crescent Pages, taking sick days to avoid Alexander's calls and the notes he'd left at the store. "Amara, please. Let me explain." Jade Carter, her ride or die, had blown up her phone with texts. "Girl, He shut that chick down. Don't do this to yourself. But Amara's fear was louder than logic. She needed clarity, and Chicago, where her cousin Malik Jackson lived, was the only place she could think to find it. Malik, a therapist with a knack for seeing through her walls, was her anchor when the world got too heavy. Right now, it was heavier than ever. The train pulled into Union Station, and Amara stepped onto the platform, her boots scuffing the concrete. Chicago hit her like a memory diesel fumes, honking cabs, the sharp bite of wind off Lake Michigan. She pulled her jacket tighter, her breath clouding in the crisp air, and caught a bus to Hyde Park, where Malik's apartment sat, above a bookstore that smelled like ink and memory. The neighborhood buzzed with students and street vendors, the lake's gray expanse looming in the distance, its waves a restless echo of her own heart. Malik's apartment was a cozy chaos of vinyl records, psychology texts, and a half-dead fern he swore he'd revive. He opened the door, his locks tied back, his brown eyes lighting up as he pulled Amara into a bear hug. "Well, damn, Mara," he said, his voice warm. "You look like you're running from a whole-ass storm." Amara laughed, but it came out brittle. "Good to see you too, cuz." They settled on his sagging couch, a plate of jerk chicken wings between them, the TV flickering with a muted Bulls game. Malik leaned back, studying her like she was one of his clients. "All right, spill it. You don't hop a train from NOLA to Chicago just for my wings. What's got you twisted up?" She sighed, picking at a wing, the spices sharp on her fingers. "It's messy." "Messy's my jam," he said, grinning. "Lay it on me." So she did. She told him about the alley, the hug, the stranger who turned out to be Alexander Reed, tech mogul. Broken man. She told him about the kiss in Crescent Pages, how it had lit her up, made her feel alive for the first time in years, and then Sophia with her perfect hair and her perfect lies tearing it all apart. "I thought I was past this," she said, her voice cracking. "Letting someone in, then watching them choose someone else. I can't go through that again." Malik listened, his face softening. "Sounds like this dude's got you shook, but you're bolting before you know the whole story. You sure you're not just scared of what could be?" "Scared?" Amara snorted, but her chest tightened. "I'm not scared. I'm smart. I've been burned before." "Yeah, and you survived," Malik said, leaning forward, his voice steady. "You're tougher than most, Mara, but you can't keep your heart on lock forever. If this guy's real, give him a shot to prove it. If he's not, you walk away knowing you didn't hide." She stared at the wing in her hand, the spices blurring as her eyes stung. Malik was right, but the fear was a beast clawing at her insides. Marcus's betrayal had left scars that still ached, and Alexander, with his fancy coat and haunted eyes, felt like a gamble she wasn't ready to make. Malik's own pain flickered in his gaze, a shadow she recognized. He'd lost his wife to cancer 2 years ago, and his therapy practice was struggling to stay afloat. A fight he didn't talk about, but carried in his shoulders. They were both survivors, but survival didn't mean trust came easy. The next day, Amara wandered into 57th Street. Books a Hyde Park gem with creaky floors and shelves that smelled of dust and dreams. She browsed the fiction section, her fingers trailing over spines when Malik dragged her to a nearby cafe for coffee. The place was all exposed brick and warm light, with students typing furiously and jazz humming from a speaker, a soft bass line that reminded her of New Orleans. They grabbed a corner table, the smell of espresso and cinnamon grounding her as she sipped her latte. "You ever think about going back to school?" Malik asked, stirring sugar into his coffee. "You were always the book-smart one, could run circles around half these professors." Amara shrugged her eyes on the steam rising from her cup. "Maybe. But I love what I do. Books, kids making a difference. Feels real." You know? Real's good, Malik said. But don't let it be a shield. You're bigger than a bookstore, Mara. She opened her mouth to argue, but the cafe door swung open and her heart stopped. Alexander Reed stood there, his coat dusted with Chicago's early frost, his blue eyes scanning the room. When they landed on her, relief and determination flashed across his face, sharp and undeniable. He crossed the cafe in long strides, ignoring the curious glances from other patrons, his presence filling the small space like a storm. Amara, he said, his voice rough, like he'd driven through the night. Can we talk? Malik raised an eyebrow, leaning back with a smirk. Well, shit. This must be Mr. New Orleans. Amara's face burned, but she didn't look away from Alexander. How'd you find me? Jade, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She's not my biggest fan, but she said you might be here. Took a chance and drove up. Drove. Amara's eyes widened. From New Orleans. 15 hours, he said, pulling out a chair. Gave me a lot of time to think. Malik chuckled, standing. I'ma let y'all sort this out, Mara. You know where I'm at. He clapped Alexander on the shoulder as he passed a silent, "Don't fuck this up." Amara crossed her arms, her pulse racing. You're crazy, you know that. Maybe he said, his eyes locked on hers, unwavering. But I'm not leaving till you hear me out. The cafe's warm light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the stubble on his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, and she caught the scent of him, sandalwood leather and the faint chill of the city clinging to his coat. Her body remembered his touch before her mind could catch up the memory of their kiss in the bookstore, burning through her Sophia's the past. He said, his voice low, firm. She left me and I let her go. What you saw at the book fair. She showed up out of nowhere trying to stir shit up, but I don't want her, Amara. I want you. Her breath caught, but the doubt was still there, sharp and jagged. You say that now? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I've heard pretty words before. They don't mean nothing when the truth comes out. He reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers, waiting. When she didn't pull away, he took it, his fingers warm and steady against her skin. The touch sent a jolt through her pulse hammering the jazz bass line, syncing with her heartbeat. His thumb grazed her wrist, slow, deliberate, and she felt it everywhere. Her chest, her thighs, the pit of her stomach. The cafe's lights blurred the warm glow, wrapping them in a cocoon, the chatter fading to a hum. I'm not him, Alexander said, his voice a low rumble, his eyes burning into hers. Whoever hurt you, I'm not him. I'm not perfect, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere, unless you tell me to. Her eyes stung, and she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. His hand tightened around hers, and he leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek, the scent of coffee and leather mingling with his cologne. Amara, he whispered, his lips so close she could feel their heat. Let me show you. Her walls cracked, and she tilted her head, their lips brushing in a kiss that was more promise than passion. His hand slid to her neck, his fingers tangling in her curls, and the world narrowed to the feel of him, warm, solid, real. The jazz pulsed a sultry note that matched the rhythm of her breath, and for a moment, she let herself believe he could be different. A barista dropped a mug, the crash shattering the moment Amara pulled back her chest, heaving, her face flushed. Alexander's eyes were dark, his breath ragged, but he didn't push. I'm sorry, he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't mean to. No, she cut him off, standing, her hands trembling as she grabbed her bag. I need time, Alexander. I can't do this right now. He nodded, his jaw tight, but his eyes were steady. I'll wait, he said. As long as it takes. She left the cafe, the Chicago wind biting her cheeks as she stepped onto the street. Her lips still tingled, her hand burning where he'd touched her. She wanted to run back to kiss him again, to let him prove he was worth the risk. But the scars were too deep, the memories too loud. She kept walking, the city's pulse drowning out the ache in her heart. Back in New Orleans, Alexander checked into a motel off Canal Street, a dive with a flickering neon sign and walls that smelled of stale smoke. He sat on the bed. Their eyes were watching. God open in his lap, the pages untouched. Chicago had been a long shot, and he'd almost had her that kiss. Brief as it was, had set him ablaze, her taste lingering like a drug. But her fear was a wall he didn't know how to scale, and it cut him deeper than he'd expected. He thought of Baltimore, the rough streets, where he'd learned to keep his heart locked tight. His father's drunken rages, his mother's absence. They'd taught him trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Sophia had been his one exception, and she'd burned him so bad he'd sworn never to try again. But Amara was different. She wasn't just a spark. She was a whole damn fire, and he'd drive 1,000 miles to keep from losing her. His phone buzzed Sophia again. Another text. Another plea to talk. He deleted it, without reading his mind on Amara's face, the way her eyes had softened before she'd pulled away. He didn't know how to fix this, but giving up wasn't an option. Not yet. Amara spent the next day wandering Hyde Park, the wind off Lake Michigan, whipping her curls as she stood by the water's edge. The lake was gray, restless, its waves crashing like her thoughts. Malik's words echoed. You can't keep your heart on lock forever. But letting Alexander in meant risking everything, and she wasn't sure she could survive another fall. She pulled. Their eyes were watching God from her bag, opening it to an underlined passage. Love is Lactacea. It's a moving thing, but still, and all it takes its shape from the shore. It meets. Her fingers trembled as she traced the words. Alexander wasn't Marcus, but that didn't mean he was safe. Still, the memory of his touch, the way his voice had cracked when he'd said her name, wouldn't let her go. Back at Malik's, he was waiting, a knowing look on his face. You see him? He asked, tossing her a beer. She nodded, sinking onto the couch. Yeah, and I don't know what to do with it. Malik sat beside her, his voice gentle. You don't gotta have it all figured out. Just don't run from the question. She didn't reply. But when she went to bed, she found a surprise on her pillow. A new copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God. Not hers, with a note in Alexander's sharp handwriting. You're the shore. I didn't know I needed. I'm not giving up. Her heart twisted, a mix of warmth and terror. She clutched the book, the Chicago skyline glowing through the window, and wondered if she had the courage to meet the sea. The French Quarter shimmered under a rare, clear sky, its neon signs blazing against the dusk, the air thick with the scent of gumbo and the faint wail of a saxophone from Bourbon Street. Inside Crescent Pages, Amara Thompson moved through the bookstore like a shadow, her hands sorting books on autopilot. Her black dress clung to her curves, her curls tied back in a tight bun, but her eyes were distant, haunted by a wound that had reopened. 2 nights ago, Sophia Laurent had swept into the store like a storm, her red dress a slash of color against the shelves. She'd wrapped her arms around Alexander Reed, her voice a low purr. We were good together. Alex, you know it. And Amara, frozen behind the counter, had felt her heart crack, the ghost of Marcus's betrayal roaring back. She'd stayed long enough to hear Alexander push Sophia away, his voice sharp. It's over. Sophia, leave. But the sight of them, Sophia's hand on his chest, his split-second hesitation had been enough. It was Atlanta all over again, the apartment where she'd found her fiancé with her best friend. The lies that had shattered her. Amara couldn't do it again. She wouldn't. Jade Carter, her ride-or-die, had tried to talk her down. Girl, he told her to kick rocks. Jade had said, her purple-streaked hair glowing under the bookstore's lights. Don't let that bougie chick run you off. But Amara's fear was a beast, and no amount of logic could tame it. She'd spent the last 2 days dodging Alexander's calls, ignoring the notes he'd left Amara. It's not what you think. Please. Her heart wanted to believe him, but her scars screamed louder. Now, as the bookstore quieted, Amara made a choice. She pulled a letter from her bag, her resignation to Crescent Pages' manager, and set it on the counter. Months ago, she'd been offered a job with a nonprofit in San Francisco teaching literacy to immigrant kids in the Mission District. She'd turned it down, too, tied to New Orleans magic. But now it was her escape, a clean break from Alexander Sophia and the pain she couldn't outrun. She grabbed a copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God from the shelf, scribbling a note inside. Find your truth. She left it on the counter, a goodbye she couldn't say out loud, and slipped into the night, the jazz fading behind her. San Francisco greeted Amara with a fog that clung like a second skin. The Mission District, a riot of color murals splashed across every wall, taqueria spilling laughter and the scent of cumin into the streets. Her new apartment, a tiny studio above a bodega, smelled of fresh paint and regret. The nonprofit job kept her busy reading Esperanza Rising to kids who reminded her of herself, brown-skinned, big-eyed, hungry for hope. She threw herself into it, trying to drown out the ache in her chest. But Alexander was everywhere. In the saxophone busker on Valencia Street, in the blue fog rolling off the bay, in the quiet moments when she opened, their eyes were watching God and traced the words she'd left for him. She'd blocked his number, but Jade's texts kept her updated against her will. He's a mess. Mara. Keeps coming by the store looking like a lost puppy. Amara told herself it was better this way. Cleaner. Safer. But at night when the city's hum faded, she could still feel his hands, the way they'd gripped her in the alley. The heat of his lips in the bookstore. It wasn't just a crush. It was a fire, and she hated how much she missed it. 3 weeks into her new life, Amara was at the community center reading Esperanza, Rising to a group of kids. The room was warm, its yellow walls lined with crayon drawings. The kids' laughter a balm to her soul. She wore a gray sweater and jeans, her curls loose, her voice steady as she read about a girl finding strength in loss. The kids clapped when she finished, and she smiled, a real one, the first in weeks. Then she looked up, and her heart stopped. Alexander stood in the doorway, his coat rumpled from travel, his blue eyes locked on her like she was the only thing in the world. The kids' chatter faded, the room shrinking to the space between them. He looked worn, his jaw shadowed with stubble, but there was a fire in his gaze that made her breath catch. Amara, he said, his voice rough, carrying across the room. I need you to hear me out. The kids giggled, sensing drama, and her co-worker Rosa, a kind-eyed woman with a quick smile, shooed them out. Take a break, Mija, Rosa said, winking. This one's got a story to tell. Amara stood, her hands trembling as she set the book down. What are you doing here, Alexander? He stepped closer. The scent of him, leather, sandalwood, and a faint trace of coffee hitting her like a wave. I drove across the country to find you, he said. New Orleans to San Francisco, stopped at every bookstore, every library, every damn place. I thought you might be. I'm not leaving till you listen. Her throat tightened, anger and longing twisting in her chest. You shouldn't have come, she said, but her voice wavered. I'm trying to move on from what he said, his voice low, urgent. From us, from what we could be. Amara Sophia's nothing to me. She showed up to mess with my head and I shut it down. I swear it's you I want. The words hit her like a punch and she turned away, her eyes stinging. The center's lights cast a soft glow, the murals outside bleeding red and gold through the windows. She wanted to believe him, but the fear was a living thing clawing at her. "You hesitated," she said, her voice breaking. "I saw it. Just for a second. But it was there." He stepped closer, his hand hovering near her arm, waiting. When she didn't pull away, he touched her, his fingers grazing her elbow, warm and steady. The contact sent a shiver through her skin prickling under her sweater. "I hesitated because she caught me off guard," he said, his voice raw. "Not because I want her. I'm sorry, Amara. I should have made it clear from the jump. You're everything." Her breath hitched, and she turned to face him, their bodies inches apart. The mural's colors danced in his eyes, red and gold, flickering like a flame. She saw the truth there, the pain, the want, the miles he'd driven to get here, and for the first time, she let herself hope. "Alexander," she whispered, and that was all it took. He closed the distance, his hands cupping her face, his lips crashing into hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry, a release of weeks of pent-up longing. His fingers tangled in her curls, pulling her closer, and she arched into him, her hands gripping his coat. The warmth of his body seeped through her sweater, his heartbeat pounding against hers. The murals cast a kaleidoscope of light across them, the faint hum of the city outside blending with their ragged breaths. He backed her against the wall, his hands sliding to her waist, slipping under her sweater to find bare skin. Her gasp was swallowed by his kiss, the roughness of his stubble grazing her cheek. The world dissolved into sensation. His lips, his hands, the low growl in his throat when she pressed closer. The air smelled of chalk and paint from the kid's drawings mingling with his cologne, a heady mix that made her dizzy. They broke apart, breathless, her forehead resting against his. "This don't mean I'm coming back," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "I can't just fall into this." "I know," he said, his hand still on her waist, his eyes dark with need. "But I'm not giving up. Not on you." That night, Amara let Alexander into her studio apartment, the fog outside muffling the mission's vibrant hum. Rain tapped against the windows, a soft echo of their first night in New Orleans. They sat on her couch, a bottle of cheap Pinot Noir between them, talking for hours about her family's loss in Atlanta, his rough childhood in Baltimore, the wounds they'd both carried too long. The conversation turned quiet, the air heavy with unspoken want. Alexander set his glass down, his eyes, tracing her face, lingering on her lips. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice low like a secret. "Not just here." He touched her cheek, his fingers warm. But here, his hand rested over her heart, the heat searing through her sweater. Her breath caught, and she leaned into him, their lips meeting in a kiss that was slower, deeper than before. The rain grew louder, a steady drumbeat matching their breaths. His hand slid under her sweater, tracing the curve of her back, and she shivered, her fingers digging into his shoulders. He pulled her onto his lap, her legs straddling his, and the world melted away, his lips on her neck, the roughness of his hands, the soft groan when she rocked against him. The room's single lamp cast a golden glow, highlighting the curve of her collarbone, the strength of his jaw. His fingers brushed the edge of her sweater, pausing, waiting for her nod. She gave it, and he lifted it off his lips, following the path of his hands, warm and reverent. The rain's rhythm quickened, but they stayed slow, savoring every touch, every breath. When they stopped lying tangled on the couch, the fog outside thick and heavy, Amara felt something shift, not just desire, but trust, fragile, but real. Alexander's arms were around her, his breath warm against her hair, and for the first time she didn't want to run. "I'm not going back to New Orleans," she said, her voice steady. "Not yet, but I want to do something bigger. Alexander, something that matters with you. If you're down." He looked at her, his eyes bright with something fierce. "I'm down," he said, his voice a vow. "Whatever you want, I'm in." The next morning, Amara woke to the smell of coffee and Alexander at her tiny kitchen counter. His shirt rumpled, his hair a mess. He handed her a mug, his smile soft but determined. "I was thinking," he said, "what if we started something, a way to help people like us? People who've been through hell but still got fight books. Support a place to feel seen." She sipped her coffee, her mind racing, like a non-profit for kids maybe, and folks who need someone to listen. "Exactly," he said, leaning closer, his hand brushing hers. "We could call it Hug Haven." After that night in the alley, her heart skipped the name, sparking something warm in her chest. "Hug Haven," she repeated, testing it. "I'm feeling that." They spent the day sketching ideas, their voices overlapping with excitement. Amara felt a purpose she hadn't known she needed, a way to channel her pain into something good. But as she looked at Alexander, his eyes alight with the same fire she knew, this wasn't just about the non-profit. It was about them. Two people who'd found each other in the dark and were choosing to build something brighter. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time she was ready to find out. Hug Haven. Alley glowed under the New Orleans dusk, its murals of open books and clasped hands shimmering in the light of solar-powered lanterns. The once dank corner behind St. Louis Cathedral was now a sanctuary, its cobblestones lined with a kindness wall where notes fluttered like prayers. "You are enough. Keep fighting." A wooden sign painted by Jade Carter stood proud. "Hug Haven Alley, where healing begins." Amara Thompson stood in the center, her black jumpsuit catching the lantern light, her curls bouncing as she directed volunteers for a community reading event. Kids from the lower Ninth Ward clutched donated books, their laughter mingling with the French Quarter's distant jazz, a saxophone riff curling through the humid air. 8 months had passed since Amara returned to New Orleans with Alexander Reed, their vision for Hug Haven, a non-profit delivering books and mental health support to kids and trauma survivors, blooming into reality. Alexander had poured his resources into it, funding a Bywater office, hiring counselors, and turning the alley into a symbol of hope. Amara had cut back hours at Crescent Pages, her days filled with reading to kids and planning programs, her nights tangled in Alexander's arms, their love a fire that burned brighter with every touch. But tonight, as she watched a girl hug the very hungry caterpillar like a lifeline, a knot of worry tightened in her chest. Hug Haven was in trouble. Their mobile library, a brightly painted van bringing books to rural Louisiana, was a success, but a money pit. Free counseling for women escaping abuse stretched their budget razor thin. Alexander had tapped his personal savings, but it wasn't enough. Donors were skittish, wanting hard data on impact, and the numbers were bleeding red. "You good, Mara?" Jade's voice cut through sharp and concerned. Her purple-streaked hair was tucked under a beanie, her nose ring glinting as she leaned against a table. Jade, now Hug Haven's art director, had painted the alley's murals, her bold strokes a testament to their fight. Amara forced a smile, adjusting a stack of books. "Just stressing. We're burning cash faster than we're pulling it in. If we don't land a big donor soon, the van's done." Jade's face fell. "That van's everything to those kids. They wait for it like it's Santa." "I know," Amara said, her voice tight. "But we can't keep floating on fumes." Alexander appeared, his sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow from moving tables. He slid an arm around her waist, his touch grounding her. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice low, steady. "We always do." She leaned into him, the scent of his sandalwood cologne calming her nerves, but the worry clung like damp heat. Something was coming, and New Orleans' magic couldn't shield them from it. The storm hit a week later when a major donor, a Miami real estate tycoon, yanked their funding after a smear campaign flooded ex-anonymous posts, traced to a shell account claimed Hug Haven was a front for Alexander's Reed Tech funneling donations to prop up his failing empire. The lies spread like wildfire, amplified by a familiar name, Sophia Laurent. She'd been silent since her last stunt at Crescent Pages, but now she was back her influencer status, weaponizing the rumors, paparazzi shots of her at a Miami gala, tearfully claiming she'd seen through Alexander's scams, fueled the fire. Worse. Amara found an email in Hug Haven's inbox, a contract draft from 2 years ago, linking Reed Tech to Apex Solutions, a corporate conglomerate now backing a rival nonprofit, Bright Futures. Alexander's signature was on it. Amara sat in Hug Haven's Bywater office, a cluttered space with Jade's murals and stacks of books staring at the email. Her hands shook the betrayal, cutting deeper than Sophia's games. Alexander paced his jaw tight, his phone buzzing with calls from his PR team. "This is bullshit," he said, tossing his phone onto the desk. "Sophia's playing dirty and Apex is her puppet master. They're trying to bury us." Amara's voice was ice. "And what about this?" She turned her laptop, the contract glaring. "You worked with Apex. You never told me." His face paled, and for a moment he looked like the man in the alley, caught and broken. "It was years ago," he said, his voice low. "A one-off deal for tech infrastructure. I cut ties when I saw how they operated. All profit, no soul. I didn't think it mattered. Didn't think it mattered." Her voice rose sharp. "You knew they're behind Bright Futures, and you kept it from me. How am I supposed to trust you when you hide shit like this?" "Amara, He reached for her, but she stepped back, her eyes blazing. "Don't," she said. "I let you in. Alexander. After everything. Marcus, my family, all of it. And now I'm wondering if I'm just a fool again." Jade burst in, her laptop under her arm, her face a mix of fury and urgency. "Y'all see this?" She flipped the screen, showing an ex-post from Bright Futures, a glossy library ad with the caption, "Real change starts with us. Hashtag Bright Futures." The comments ripped Hug Haven apart. Scam, Haven, small-time frauds. "We're losing donors fast," Jade said. "We gotta fight back." Amara stood, her anger hardening into resolve. "We're not letting them win. We go to Miami. Sophia's Turf, a fundraiser book, drive the works. We show the world what Hug Haven's about." Alexander nodded, his eyes still on her, pleading. "I'll make calls, pull every string I got, but Amara, save it." She cut him off, her voice cold. "This is about Hug Haven now, not us." 2 weeks later, Miami's Wynwood district thrummed with life, its streets lined with murals and food trucks, the air thick with salsa music and ocean salt. Hug Haven's fundraiser filled a courtyard framed by graffiti-covered walls, tables piled with donated books, a stage set for readings. Volunteers, including Jade and Lila Brooks, a former Hug Haven client turned counselor, worked the crowd, handing out flyers and coffee. Kids from local shelters clutched new books, their eyes bright, while donors mingled their checkbooks, ready but hesitant. The ex-rumors lingering like smoke. Amara stood backstage, her heart pounding, her black dress shimmering under the stage lights. She was set to speak, to tell Hug Haven's story. But the weight of it all. Sophia's lies, the kids' futures, Alexander's secret pressed down like a storm. Alexander was beside her, his hand hovering near her back, his eyes searching for forgiveness she wasn't ready to give. "You got this," he said, his voice low, raw. "You're the heart of Hug Haven." "Amara, always." She nodded, drawing strength from the crowd's energy, but her trust in him was fractured. The MC, a local DJ, called her name, and the crowd roared their cheers. A tidal wave. Amara stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding the murals behind her, a riot of color blues, reds, yellows like a pulse painted on brick. She gripped the mic, her voice trembling, then steadying. "I'm Amara Thompson," she said, her words carrying over the crowd. 8 years ago, I lost my family in a crash. 4 years ago, I lost the man I loved to lies. I thought I was done, that I'd never find my way. But one night in a New Orleans alley, I hugged a stranger who was hurting as bad as me. That hug changed everything." The crowd was silent, hanging on her words. She saw Lila in the front row, tears in her eyes, Jade nodding fiercely. Alexander stood off stage, his gaze unwavering, and despite her anger, his presence anchored her. "Hug Haven's not about money or headlines," she continued, her voice rising. "It's about kids who need stories to dream, women who need strength to leave abuse, people who need to know they're not alone. We're here because we've been broken, and we're not giving up, not on them, not on each other." The crowd erupted their cheers, shaking the courtyard. Amara's eyes stung, but she held steady. "So I'm asking you to join us. Donate. Volunteer, believe in us. Because one hug can start a fire and we're burning bright." She stepped back, the applause deafening, and Lila took the stage, her voice strong as she shared her story of escaping abuse with Hug Haven's help. The crowd's tears and cheers grew, donors opening their wallets, the ex-rumors fading under the weight of truth, but Amara's heart was still heavy as she slipped off stage. Alexander following her to a quiet corner by the courtyard's edge. The ocean, a dark shimmer beyond Amara, he said, his voice breaking. "I fucked up. I should have told you about Apex. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. I'm all in with you with Hug Haven. Please give me a chance to prove it." She looked at him, his eyes raw, his hands trembling. The salsa music pulsed the ocean's salt heavy in the air. Her anger cracked and she stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "No more secrets, Alexander. If we're doing this, it's all or nothing." He nodded, his hand reaching for hers, his fingers warm. "All I swear." The courtyard's lights dimmed, the crowd's noise fading as they slipped away, finding a secluded stretch of Miami Beach. The waves crashed a steady rhythm, the moon casting a silver glow across the sand. They stood close, the air warm, the scent of salt and seaweed mingling with his cologne. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing her jaw, and their kiss was fierce, a release of anger and need. Her hands gripped his shirt, the fabric rough under her fingers, and she felt the heat of him through her dress, his heartbeat syncing with hers. The sand was cool under her bare feet, the waves raw, matching their breaths. His hand slid to her waist, pulling her against him, and she arched into him, her lips parting, the kiss deepening until the world was just them, two people fighting through pain to find each other. They pulled apart, breathless, the ocean's spray misting their skin. "We're not done," she said, her voice steady, "but we're starting over. Clean." He nodded, his forehead against hers, his voice a vow. Clean back in New Orleans. The fundraiser's success was bittersweet. Donations poured in enough to save the mobile library. But the Baltimore branch closed, a loss that stung. Amara and Alexander sat in Hug Haven's office, the city's hum filtering through the window, the financial reports grim but hopeful. Amara looked at him, his hand in hers, and felt a fragile trust rebuilding. "We saved what we could," she said, her voice soft. "But we're not stopping. More libraries, more cities." He squeezed her hand, his eyes bright. "With you, I'm in for all of it." The jazz outside wove through the air, a reminder of where they'd started. They'd lost something, but they'd gained more, A partnership, a purpose, a love that could weather the storm. Hug Haven Alley shimmered under the New Orleans twilight, its murals of open books and clasped hands glowing in the soft light of solar-powered lanterns. The cobblestones, once slick with rain and despair, were now worn smooth by visitors leaving notes on the kindness wall, scribbled messages like, "You're never alone, and keep the fire alive." A wooden sign painted by Jade Carter stood tall, "Hug Haven Alley, where healing begins." Tonight the alley buzzed with the 5th annual Hug Day, a celebration of small acts of kindness that had grown into a national movement. Volunteers handed out books and po' boys kids from the lower 9th Ward, clutched new stories, and a jazz band played a soulful riff that wove through the French Quarter's humid air. Amara Thompson, now 34, stood amid the crowd, her gray dress catching the lantern light, her curls loose and streaked with faint gray from sleepless nights. She was no longer the guarded bookstore clerk who'd hugged a stranger in the rain. She was a leader, her voice carrying weight as Hug Haven's co-founder, her heart open despite the scars. Beside her, Alexander Reed, 37, held their 3-year-old daughter Maya, who clutched a battered copy of The Color Purple, her brown eyes sparkling. Oliver, their 6-year-old son, darted through the crowd, his laughter echoing his curls bouncing as he chased a firefly. 5 years had passed since their reunion in San Francisco, their love forged through pain, betrayal, and purpose. Their wedding, a quiet ceremony in a Marini church, had been a vow, not just to each other, but to the world they'd build. Jade had been Amara's bridesmaid, cracking jokes through tears. "Can't believe you're hitching up with Tech Boy." Mara. Oliver and Maya's arrivals had been joyful chaos, their giggles patching the cracks in Amara and Alexander's souls. Alexander, once a guarded billionaire, was now a dad who fumbled through bedtime stories and built bookshelves for Hug Haven, his wealth dwindling as he poured it into their mission. Hug Haven had grown with branches in Chicago, San Francisco, and Atlanta, each with mobile libraries and counseling hubs. The Miami branch had closed after the Apex Solutions smear, a loss that still stung, but the organization was a beacon, its story told in documentaries and community rallies. Lila Brooks, once a client, now led the Chicago branch, her resilience inspiring others. Malik Jackson, Amara's cousin, ran therapy programs in Atlanta. His practice revived with Hug Haven's support. But a new challenge loomed. Tasha, Amara's newly discovered cousin, had surfaced in Atlanta, stirring family secrets and resentment that threatened to unravel Amara's peace. Amara pinned a note to the kindness wall. One hug, one fight. One. Love her eyes tracing the murals, memories flooding back. That rainy night when she'd knelt beside Alexander, not knowing his name, only his pain, his sobs blending with the rain. The ring she'd slipped into his pocket, that hug had sparked Hug Haven, pulling her from the loneliness of her family's death, Marcus's betrayal. Now it was a legacy. But Tasha's arrival had shaken her, a reminder that some wounds never fully healed. "You okay, Mara?" Alexander's voice was soft, pulling her back. He set Maya down, letting her toddle to Oliver, and stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm. His blue eyes, softer now, with years of love, searched her face. She sighed, leaning into him, his sandalwood scent grounding her. "Just thinking about Tasha. She's angry. Says I abandoned the family by leaving Atlanta. I didn't even know she existed till last month." He cupped her face, his thumb grazing her cheek. "You didn't abandon anyone. You built something bigger than family. A whole damn movement. Tasha'll come around." Her lips curved, but the doubt lingered Tasha's words at their tense Atlanta meeting. "You ran off to play hero while we were stuck." Cut deep, echoing Amara's guilt over surviving when her family didn't. The jazz band slowed a saxophone, weaving a melody that felt like a heartbeat. A young woman approached her voice, shy. "Miss Amara, Hooghaven got me through leaving my ex. I'm in school now, studying to be a counselor. Thank you." Amara's throat tightened and she squeezed her hand. "You're why we do this. Keep going." As the crowd thinned, Amara and Alexander lingered in the alley. Oliver and Maya now with Jade, who'd taken them for beignets. The lanterns cast a golden glow, the murals shimmering like a dream. Alexander turned to her, his hand finding hers, his fingers tracing her palm. "We did it, didn't we?" he said, his voice thick with pride. She squeezed his hand, her eyes bright. "We're still doing it. But I need you with me, Alexander, through all the mess." He pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead, then her cheek, then her mouth. The kiss was slow, deep, a fire that hadn't dimmed. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her against him, and she felt the strength of him through her dress, his heartbeat syncing with hers. The jazz wove around them, a sultry note that matched their breaths. His fingers traced her spine, warm and deliberate, and she arched into him, her hands tangling in his hair. The lantern's glow danced across her skin, highlighting the curve of her neck, the softness of her lips, the air heavy with magnolia and his cologne. For a moment, the world was theirs, two people who'd turned pain into purpose, loss into love. They pulled apart, breathless, her forehead against his. Maya's giggle broke the silence and Amara laughed. The sound bright. "We're a hot mess," she said, teasing kissing in alleys like teenagers. "Best kind of mess," he said, his grin boyish, his eyes alight. "And I'm all in for it." They walked through the French Quarter, pushing Maya's stroller, Oliver skipping ahead, the neon signs glowing like stars. Amara looked at her family at the alley fading behind and felt whole. Not perfect, but whole. Tasha's anger was a storm they'd face, but Hooghaven was their anchor, a promise born from a hug that no one could break. Epilogue. A fire, still burning. 6 months later, Amara and Alexander stood in Atlanta's West End, opening Hooghaven's newest branch during a vibrant Kwanzaa festival. The community center, painted in bold reds and greens, buzzed with kids and volunteers. A mobile library parked outside Malik led a therapy workshop. His smile wide, his practice thriving. Lila read to a group of teens, her voice steady, her Chicago work a model for Atlanta Jade, her murals gracing the walls, snapped photos her new girlfriend, a journalist who'd exposed Apex Solutions by her side. Tasha was there, her eyes wary but softer. After months of hard talks, she joined Hooghaven, her anger easing as she saw Amara's fight. "I was wrong," she'd admitted last week, her voice quiet. "You didn't run. You built something real." Their hug had been tentative, but it was a start. Amara watched the festival, her hand in Alexander's. Oliver and Maya chasing balloons nearby. The Atlanta skyline glittered, the air thick with barbecue smoke and hip-hop from a street DJ. She thought of the alley in New Orleans, the rain, the hug that had sparked it all. It wasn't just a moment. It was a movement touching lives she'd never know. Alexander leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "You ever think we'd get here?" He whispered, his voice warm. She smiled, her eyes meeting his. "Not in a million years, but I'm glad we did." He kissed her, quick but fierce, and Maya giggled, tugging at his leg. The crowd cheered, the center alive with hope, and Amara knew this was just the beginning. Hooghaven would grow, and so would they, through loss, fight, and love. The Miami branch was gone. Tasha's wounds lingered, but their fire burned brighter for it. As the sun set, painting the sky in orange and pink, Amara looked at her family, her community, her legacy. She'd hugged a stranger once, and now with Alexander by her side, she was hugging the world. "Hey, Soul Stories fam." Amara and Alexander's journey was epic, right? Drop a comment and share your own kindness story. What's a hug that changed your life? Hit that subscribe button for more heart-tugging tales.